Hi, so in this video I'm going to show you how to connect Delphi 7 to an Access query. Now you should already have had your form set up with a database connection, and I've also added some form controls. I'm not going to show you how to do form controls in this video because you should already know. Apologies for any sound issues, by the way. I found it impossible to find a quiet room, so I hope it's good enough. Anyway, so what we're going to do is I'm going to just check if when a user enters their username, when they click this button, it's going to come back with a message in here telling me if that user exists or not. I'm not going to show you how to do a login, guys, because you have to think for yourselves. Okay, but using the techniques in this video, you should be able to work out the logic to do a login page. So all the code is actually going to go on this button, but before we start coding, we need to add in a query connection. So if you click on the Edu tab, there is a query connection which you just drag onto the form. Need to click on your query and give it a sensible name. Now I'm going to call it query check because that's what it does, it checks login. You also need to give it a connection, and if you connected it up properly last time, your connection will be there, and that's all you need to do for that little button. So all the results, all the code is going to go on this button, so we double click the button to go into the procedure for that button. Now we have our query. Now we need to give it some code, we need to give it some SQL, and the way to do that is to call query check dot SQL dot add. So we are adding some SQL to that query, and the SQL will go there. Now I'm just going to show you the database quickly. Connecting to the Green Bay database, which you should have seen before. So we have the bidders who bid on the house and then get given a plot. Notice that the table name doesn't have a space in it. This makes it much easier to code, guys. I suggest you do the same. Also, my fields do not have spaces in them either. I've used underscores or I've just put them both together. Okay, so all I'm going to do is I'm simply going to check if a bidder exists. I'm going to check the bidders table if the bidder exists. I'm not going to give you the answer for a login form. So the SQL for that would be select bidders from the bidders table where the bidders is equal to the edit text. Now I can't put the edit text into the code, guys, okay, but what I can do is I can put in a parameter called current user, and then I can get the result from that text box and put it into the current user. So select bidders from bidders table where the bidders equals the current user. So now I need to tell the SQL what that current user actually means, and to do that, query check dot parameters dot param by name, and the parameter I want is the current user. The value of that parameter becomes equal to the edit users dot text. So this basically equals that, okay, and the code to do that is to tell the query that the parameter by name, which is current user, the current user's value equals the text box name, the text box text, sorry. Okay, then you need to say query check dot open. So if I run the form just to find out and put in a user that I know exists and check it, absolutely nothing happens, which is fine because we've told it not to do anything. Well, we haven't told it to do anything, that's why it's not doing anything. So that's the next step. We now need to actually tell the form to do something. We know the user exists because we can check the database. The SQL is correct we know because the form runs. So, like I said, what we're going to do is check if this text box, the value of this entity is this text box, exists in the database. This text box is going to say he exists, and if it doesn't, it's going to say they don't exist. And in order to do that, we need to store the result from that query. Okay, we can get the return. In order to do that, we need a variable to store the result from the query. So var, and I'm going to put the query results. I'm going to call it query result. Is going to be a string because that's what we're going to get back from the query. Right, notice when I name my variables I use a lowercase at the start. That tells me it's a variable, because when I use form controls, etc., I use a caps lock which tells me it's a form control. It's an easy way of keeping track between the two guys, because it will get confusing, especially when you have a lot. So in order to get the result of that query, query result, result becomes equal to query check dot, then I need to get the field by name, and the field I need is the bidders, because that's the field I'm looking in. I need to return it as a string. So to my variable, it's going to be the result of the query, field by name, the field I'm looking for is bidders, and I'm returning it as a string. Now if it's an integer, guys, you need to return it as an integer, but you need to make sure the result it's going into is also an integer. Right, so I've got the result. Now I need to do a check. So if the query result is equal to what is in the edit user, if I can spell it would help, then the edit check text is going to become equal to exists. Otherwise, if it doesn't equal, I'm going to put edit check dot text becomes equal to does not exist. Notice I didn't put doesn't here, because the string would end when I put the apostrophe in, which is really... let's spell exist right. Okay. Right, there's one more thing we need to do, guys, before we can run this, okay? Now, if all of this falls over, it will break your code. Even if the code is correct, if the query doesn't return anything, it will break. So, in order to stop that, after the begin, we can put what's called a try catch, which basically means if try this, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then basically the program can ignore it. We also need, after the try, a finally, and after the finally we need to close the query. If we don't close the query, we'll have a memory leak, and that's bad. It means the query is going to stay constantly open, and the program won't finish, basically. So now we have all that. Now let's see if it runs. Oh, I haven't ended the try. Okay, and the try. Try that now. Right, moment of truth. Let's put in a user. Hey, he exists. Now I can't run that again, guys, without it falling over. So let's see if the let's see if Bob exists. No, Bob doesn't exist. So there we go, guys. That's how to link a query to a Delphi form, how to do an if statement to check the results of a query.